Hi, today I thought we'd have a little bit of fun with some squares, in fact 2 different sizes of squares to be used together. So you can see behind me here I've got a square block here which has got this dark piece down the middle and 2 different triangles on it. So what I started out with was actually a full-size black square and 2 other squares that are kind of similar, and that's because they're 5-inch squares. That's what I'm using there, and this is a 6.5 inch. And I had these 5-inch squares in my stash, and I thought it was time they had a little airing. So what I've got is the 6.5 inch square and 2 5-inch squares will give you that, but it will also give you 2 smaller ones as well, because that's what we're going to be trimming off. So I'll show you how I've gone about that, and we can have a lot of fun with this block. It does all sorts of wonderful things. So I'm actually going to show you with white. I've made some white ones as well. So I've already gone ahead here and got some things ready. So what we need to do is have a white, or whatever the colour is that we're choosing as a colour that's going through things. In this case it's white. That needs to be 6.5 inch if you're going to make it the size I'm making. Of course you could use different size squares. And then some 5-inch squares. And on the back of the 5-inch square we need to just have a couple of lines to follow. So we just want to do a diagonal from point to point. I'm just marking with a pencil, and then 1/2 inch away to one side we mark another diagonal. And what we're going to do is sew on both of those lines and cut between them. So we're going to place one of the 5-inch squares onto the 6.5 inch square, and obviously one is smaller than the other, and so then we're going to sew on both of those lines and cut them apart. And so I'll go ahead and do all that so that I can show you how things are going. So this is, as I said, quite a fun little block to make because it is very versatile, and I'll show you what I mean by that very soon. You can chain piece these. I've actually got another one ready here just to show you that actually it's very easy to pop these through, so you could be making a whole lot of these all in one go. Just pop it in and put the next one in. And you might be doing 20 of those, but I'm only doing 2. And then I'm going to come back and do the second line of sewing, and just the same, we can chain piece these through. And then we're going to cut those apart. Well, initially we're going to separate them, and then we're going to cut those. So if you lay most rulers have a 1/4 inch in from the edge line. If you lay that over the top of the longer sewing line, the diagonal, full diagonal line, and then cut so that you're cutting 1/4 inch away, but it's halfway between that sewing line and the other one, so you've got another piece that's come off there. So I'll just do the second one while I'm here, and I'm going to bring the iron over just to show you what happens next. So on here I'm going to just press that seam. Now I am going to press it into the colour because I'm working with white. It doesn't particularly matter which way you go, but I probably would press all my blocks the same way just for the sake of being consistent, really. And then I would do the same with this piece here, because we're going to be able to use these pieces as well. And then we need to come back and do the other side, so exactly the same thing. So I might go ahead and do that. You don't need to watch me do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to put on the opposite corner of my square, I'm going to put the other one, and I'm going to sew my 2 lines and then cut them and press them just the same as I've done that side. So this is a different fabric, and that's fine. They don't need to be the same. They can have variety in them. So I'll go ahead and do this and come back and show you when I've got that all trimmed up. So I've finished sewing my pieces. I'm just ironing that second triangle down now. So that's pretty good. I've gone ahead, I've got my block, it's looking a whole lot like this one, it won't have changed size, although I should say it shouldn't have changed size. Because we started with the 6.5 inch square and all we've done is just rearrange the fabric that's in the corner, it should still measure 6.5 inches square. And then the pieces that I trimmed off, these were the pieces that came from here, and so I've just pressed those open, and now what we're going to do is just trim those into a usable size. So I'm trimming them down to so that they measure 3.5 inches, which works really well for me, and I think it's probably quite a good size. So what I'm doing here is I've got a diagonal line on my square, and I've got markings of course with size along, and so I'm going to lay the diagonal line right on that diagonal, and I want to make sure that my 3.5 on the two sides here is fitting on the fabric, and then I can trim away these two sides. So make sure your diagonal stays on that diagonal join of your block. Trim away these two sides here, and making sure that you go along the ruler, and then turn that around and place that diagonal line back onto that there, but this time line up your 3.5 with those two edges that you've just trimmed. So that should all work. That diagonal line's there, my 3.5's there, and my 3.5 is there. So I can now trim that to measure a 3.5 inch square, nice and tidy. And there it is. So nothing too hard about that. What that would give us, if we wanted to use them in that way, would be if we join those together, if we join 4 of them together, whichever way you choose to do that, you would end up with another 6.5 inch square. So there's just another option that you could make something quite different with those. But I did want to show you some different ways of arranging this particular block, because it's kind of a lot of fun. It's not just a block, it's a super simple block. It uses 5 inch squares. A lot of us have those that need using up. But you can lay it out in so many different ways. So as I've got up on the wall here, if I pop that in there, you can see that you get that nice cross going on, and then it's going to join up into sort of the diamond if you continue on. So that would be a way with these white ones, just the same as I've got the black up on the wall. I'm hoping you can see all these. And so that's the same as I've got the black on the wall. But then what about if I turn things around and we could have this sort of V happening repeatedly, and then of course you'd have it zigzagging if you wanted to along. If you put them further along, you're going to get that zigzag. There's just so many different possibilities of playing with this sort of block that it's almost impossible to just do it one way. You're really just going to have to make several of these quilts to be able to enjoy it. That's another one, just put the block the same way repeatedly. So what I did, rather than have to make lots and lots of quilts, was I have Electric Quilt software program, and so I've done some diagrams up in there. So this one here, you can see I've done that zigzagging, and which gives you that sort of V repeated that way. You could put a strip between if you wanted the V in particular. This one here, that's the sort of X that we're getting, but when you join them up, you end up with this nice lattice looking quilt. This one here is something like I've got with these just laid, but then they change direction to give you that going around. And this one here, I have just laid them all in the same direction to do that. Now, there's another thing you might notice about these. I've got these nice borders here. Now, these borders are made with, guess what? These squares that we made when we trimmed them off from here. So, to make a border, so you could have all of these fabrics used in the one quilt. So, some of the borders are made with this sort of shape, repeating along. But like, you can top and tail them, you can do them the same way. So this one here I've topped and tailed. This one here I've just repeated the same direction, and that one as well is the same as that. And then this one here I've just turned them so that you get this kind of diagonal stripe, and again you can change direction with things like that as well. So there's so many possibilities of playing with these blocks. And then on this next page I got carried away with some colours so that you get some idea of how it might look in other colourways. So here I've used a sort of tealy sort of colour here, which doesn't necessarily stand out as much, but you may not want something as stark as the black and white. This one here with the black with some bright coloured fabrics, a cream here also with some quite bright coloured fabrics, and then just a nice grey which just tends to give you a nice softer look, but all again with these different borders. So this border here is very similar to this, but we're just turning these around so that, anyway, I'm not going to do it for you because I'll get it wrong in front of you. But you can see it's just the two strips that makes it look a little bit like a ribbon, and the triangles and things much the same as we had there. So I just thought I'd show you how you can have a little bit of fun with some 6.5 inch and 5 inch squares, and turn them around, play with them, change the colours, whatever it is that you feel like doing, and use up the other portion of the squares that we've trimmed away as borders or as alternate blocks or something like that. There's just so much you can do. I just wanted to trigger your imagination so that you can go on and have a little bit of a play with two different size squares. Thank you.